Welcome to Science Unplugged, sir, the podcast where science and conversations collide. Join us for a deeper look into the world of innovation. And we are your hosts, Charvi Trivedi.
And the Slimai
Hello.
Farooq. Let's explore the insights from the world of science. From the lab to the field, we'll dive into the stories and experiences of researchers, experts, and innovators who are shaping an understanding of the world.
Today we have with us Dr. Kunal Gupta. He did his PhD in environmental engineering from Texas A&M University and a master's in biochemical engineering from IIT Delhi. Currently serving as the publishing editor at ACS Omega, Dr. Gupta is also a passionate science communicator and he's dedicated to making research accessible and engaging. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join this initiative from Lab LinkUp and looking forward to the conversation ahead.
It is an honor to have you here today with us. Today's podcast will be mostly about your professional background and would serve as a source of motivation for the youngsters. So let's start further. You are a science communicator. However, you did your PhD in environmental engineering, where you worked on microfiltration membranes. Can you share a little bit about your research work and its importance in today's world?
Certainly, yes. So my PhD work was primarily on microfiltration membranes, as you mentioned. But the main, let's say, when we talk about membranes, it's about filtration, which is basically taking dirty water and pushing it through a membrane and essentially getting clean water out of it. So the primary feed that I was using was basically treated wastewater. So essentially, when you have wastewater, it goes through a lot of treatment processes, and what you end up with is essentially a treated wastewater. But it's still not something that you would want to use. It generally, after treatment, is put back into the environment. However, as we can certainly agree, there is with climate change and way the development is happening, there is certainly a need for focus on how to be able to use water more efficiently. So that is where the idea of water reuse comes in, where water reuse is essentially you take this treated wastewater and then you treat it even further and potentially bring it to drinkable quality. So that's the final goal of the research essentially. So in that process, to take that treated wastewater to essentially potable water, there will be multiple steps that are involved. There are like 4 or 5 steps, if anything, or even more than that in advanced treatment plants. In any case, in that one of those steps is microfiltration membrane. So basically, the treated wastewater first goes to this microfiltration membrane where we are trying to kind of remove some of the foulants, some of the, let's say, the microorganisms, and then take it down to the next steps. So this is where my research was focused on. I was trying to explore and understand as to what happens during the process when this treated wastewater is going through the membrane. Because when you put something to the filter, it would foul the filter. It would get there are things that get stuck to the filter. So my research was focused on understanding what exactly gets stuck to the filter, and is there ways to kind of potentially reduce this stucking or simply speaking fouling more technically. So that was the primary goal of the research, to holistically understand what exactly is happening during the process, and based on this understanding, can we develop solutions that can potentially increase, let's say, the operational efficiency of these microfiltration units? And broadly, at the end, if you look at it from a broader goal perspective, as I mentioned, there is obviously a really important need to have more efficient water treatment processes. And that is where water reuse was something that I was interested in pursuing. And that's what I pursued during my PhD.
That's very interesting. Also, we would like to know what were the challenges that you faced during your PhD journey and what kept you motivated throughout?
Okay. Yeah, I think so. PhD in general, if you speak to anyone who has done a PhD or doing a PhD, will always tell you the PhD itself is a challenge, because it's at the end what you're trying to kind of achieve out of a PhD is that novelty, right? There's a whole buildup of research that you're working with, and you want to kind of take it to the next step, or at least add that incremental value that is unique to you, that is individual to you. So that's the main agenda or motive of any PhD. So that itself, just imagine you have like thousands of years of research, and you're trying to make an uh, incremental improvement in that research or find something new in that research. It itself is a challenge. So, I mean, that apart, there are specific challenges that are unique to every PhD. It depends on the labs that you're working with, advisor that you're working with, the lab mates that you have. So the people around you, they also, I wouldn't say they are necessarily themselves challenges, but they come together to create situations and circumstances that can be challenged. Maybe you want to use an instrument for your research and, well, it's booked for a month. What are you going to do? So these are the kind of, I think, more, I would say, operational challenges that you face. And if you look at it from an individual point of view, during my PhD, I think obviously it was something that I kind of transitioned. I was at IIT Delhi doing my master's and then went for my PhD. So it was a big transition going from, let's say, a national university in India to an international university in US where the whole culture, whole way of doing things is very much different, right? So adapting to that, I think in my first 2 years, it took me some time to kind of adapt to the processes involved. How do you deal with the people around you? How do you interact with your advisor? Because even the dynamics are different. If you do a PhD in India, I'm not sure, I would not generalize, but in typically what happens is there is a lot of collaboration that happens between the, let's say, the supervisor and the PhD student. The supervisor is the idea generator. However, at least in India, that's the case right now. It might be evolving. It's been some time I've been in that place. But in US, it has always been that the research idea needs to come from the student itself. And someone who is just joining, understanding the cultural background, it took some time to kind of even get the momentum going. So I think those were kind of different ways of putting it as challenges. But when it comes to the motivation, I think obviously one of the motivation is that I would say simply that after 2 years it has gone through, you have kind of now you have built in yourself the skills and abilities. You kind of feel that, oh, I have almost crossed the main barrier, right? That activation energy barrier, if you take it as it is. I have already crossed that. Now it's time to kind of churn out the products, and that's kind of motivates you. And the first paper, or let's say the first research result, or the first conference that you go to, and you get that feedback from your peers, your community, that kind of really gives you a sense of accomplishment, right? And every time you publish a paper, you get that additional accomplishment. Okay, what I'm doing there, that let's say if you have that insecurity or whether I'm capable or not, and suddenly your paper gets accepted in a top tier journal, you get to know, oh yes, they accept me as a peer, right? So I think that's the kind of motivation. And in addition to that, I think one motivation that I'll always say is always the individual motivation as to why you wanted to do a PhD. For me, coming to the PhD was this continuous uh, like I would say, continuous way that I wanted to kind of get into my core engineering, right? I was a biochemical engineer in bachelor's, did my master's to try and find that core job, but did not get it. So I went to PhD. And I should tell you, for the 5 years that I was there, I really put my engineering skills to actual use and actual test and really enjoyed it. So I think that motivation was always there that because I was building something, I was doing something, I was accomplishing something, and that kind of started to show up after 2 year mark, and that kept me motivated to continue for another almost 3 years finalize my PhD.
Yes, sir. Actually, what you just said makes a lot of sense because I can also somewhat relate to it, especially about the part where you mentioned about publishing. I mean, I know it's not
Mhm.
very important, but it's definitely an important aspect of your PhD career. And I myself, like, I just finished my master's and I was a part of a paper, and it was really
Mhm.
a good feeling, after all your hard work, you can like just see it out there. So yeah, that's really well said. So,
Yeah.
Taslim.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned with regards to publishing, I completely agree that that's not the final goal, but that is, I would say, one of the tangible ways to know that what you're doing actually is being accepted by your peer community, right?
Yes, sir, definitely.
So, sir, how long did you work in the engineering field before you switched to the scientific publishing?
Actually, so yeah, so basically, to be honest, I never got to work in engineering field because after my biochemical engineering, my bachelor's, there were some core jobs available. I tried my hand with some, let's say, sugar factory because biochemical engineering does a lot of alcohol production, basically taking sugarcane bagasse, sugarcane, and then kind of converting into ethanol. So I did try my hand there, but the kind of job that was available there was not something I felt was challenging my engineering skills. Maybe my individual personal skills were being used, but not necessarily engineering. So I kept on kind of hunting for it. Even after IIT Delhi, I kind of tried to find a core job, not necessarily there. So I worked as a chemistry educator for 1 year in a tech firm. And during that time, I kept on, I still that, as I mentioned, that vigor was there that I want to work in my core job, I use my engineering skills. So that's where I landed up in my PhD. And I think when I landed up in my PhD, I was thinking that, okay, this will take me to the core job. But for 5 years, I did what I learned in my engineering. I had to solve a lot of equations. I had to use those what you call instruments like multimeters to kind of actually develop my own system. So all sorts of engineering skills that I had, I put in my PhD. But by the end of my PhD, I think one thing I was very much clear and understood of is that I don't necessarily need to run for my core job. All I need to do is what I skills that I have and essentially find the kind of organizations or firms that are looking to utilize my skills, that are going to simply say, pay for my skills that I have. So I was not necessarily, after my PhD, I was not necessarily looking for engineering jobs. I was looking for a whole host of organizations that would be interested in my skills. And those would be, I was interested in doing R&D if there was something to be on offer. I was interested in doing consulting because I understand how to use and make sense of data and provide information based on that data. So I was okay with consulting as well. And obviously, scientific publishing. And even before scientific publishing, there was a 2 year period I worked as an outreach manager where I was actually interacting and working with scientific researchers, primarily focusing on potentially developing programs which could help researchers do better work, something like what you guys are doing, right? You're trying to put out information to youngsters out there. So this is something that I was doing for 2 years as an outreach manager. So to answer your question, I have never worked in an engineering field, but for 5 years when I was doing my PhD, I used the most amount of engineering skills I could at that time during that period.
So, sir, what motivated you? What was the final tip that made you switch to this full-time science communication and publishing?
Okay, I think maybe rectify. I'm not necessarily. I mean, science communication is something that is very personal to me. It's something that I really want to do, and I'm doing it on a personal level. Whenever I get time, I read it. I try to read things, and then I try to kind of make an interpretation of it. That's the extent of science communication I do. Scientific publishing is certainly a very, I would say, a very conscious decision on my part. As I mentioned, right after my PhD, I came back to India because that was always the plan. So as soon as I graduated, I was landing in India in a week or so. And then I started looking for jobs in India, whatever was available again to pay for my skills. And I think I started as a freelancer, scientific editing, because obviously the amount of effort it went into writing my own papers had helped me hone the skills of scientific writing. So I worked as a freelancer in scientific editing. And then as it transpired, there was job opening that was there, which was for a publishing role. I interviewed and I was informed that I was more suited for an outreach role. I was more than happy that okay, if you feel that my skills are suited for that, I'm happy to go there because this was something I was very clear on that my skills get me paid. That's the end of everything that I'm doing. And I think when I joined as an outreach manager there, my focus was I think I really enjoyed the work because it gave me an opportunity to interact with the researchers and potentially kind of explore an aspect of my own personality where I could be of actual value to the people I was interacting with, right? And on a more broader level, and potentially kind of gain more understanding about people and how I can help the people. So that's where I think the society that I am part of basically the mission and vision of the society is very much something that I really kind of relate to myself as well. So I think when even with that whole outreach manager work and outreach work that I was doing for 2 years, I think there was always this discontent that I was not necessarily interacting with science. Now, this is something that I had gained a lot of love for in my past 5 years of PhD or my master's as well. I started to like science a lot, and I wanted to kind of essentially take my hobby and potentially make it my work. That's the plan, right? That's everyone has been told that if you enjoy what you do, you don't have to work a day. So I'm trying to reach there. That is the idea. So I think scientific publishing felt like something that kind of offered me that opportunity to continuously engage with science. And that's why I transitioned here. There was a potential opening available. It felt like a right time to take that decision because, as I mentioned, the 2 year barrier is always there. It was there in PhD, it was there in this role as well when I was working. But this time it felt that the activation energy was not yet reached. So I could actually take a step back and restart the whole reaction and go back to my I would say, career progression. And I'm glad I did that step because it has allowed me to do this, what I'm doing, the science communication, because I continuously engage with science. And a lot of things that I read is what I kind of put out there in my science communication articles as well. So, as I mentioned, I'm trying to reach that stage where uh, I start to enjoy my work as much as it becomes my own personal hobby altogether. So that's where I am.
That is very interesting, sir. So, just out of curiosity, how different is the publishing sector from that of the research one? Like as you said, you spent your 5 years in your PhD. So, are there any similarities or any differences between both? What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think, see, there is obviously a difference. I think anyone, even if you haven't been in either of the roles, you still would be able to define that there is a difference. Research is, I think research is very, I would say, there's a question, there's a problem that you're trying to solve. That's research all about, right? You're trying, or maybe you're just trying to understand a concept or a certain manifestation of physical forces, and you're trying to kind of understand. So that's research. Whereas when you look at publishing, it's a completely whole. It's a business, right? It's a business process. It's an operation. There are things that are moving in and out of the, let's say, a system. There are manuscripts coming in. They are going into processing. They're going back to the authors. They're going to the editors. They're going to the authors. There's a whole sorts of thing going on in publishing. So I don't think so. We need to compare the two, but I think when it comes to, I think similarities, it's very much there because they both kind of require a similar amount of rigor. When you're doing, let's say, a research, right? You want to make sure that if you did one experiment, you want to kind of make sure you do it at least three times, right? Just for reproducibility and statistical repeatability. And let's say when I receive a manuscript, there is a certain process on that manuscript. I need to make sure that it passes a certain sets of quality control checks, right? And similarly, when you're doing research, you're trying to kind of answer a problem. In sometimes when you're doing publishing work, the authors, reviewers will have questions for you, and you'll have to answer those questions. So there is a lot of decision making involved. There's a lot of problem solving involved, right? These are, I would say, the broader skill sets. Obviously, how you apply them in research and how you apply them in publishing would be very much different because the whole set of parameters or variables that you're working with, they are very much different. But the key core skills, and that is why I kept on talking about skills earlier as well, is something that you kind of develop. You develop those critical thinkings. You do have to do a lot of critical thinking when you're doing research. And the same has to be done for an article as well. When an article comes in, you have to make that call on that article, whether it's within scope for you or not, right? So there are so many aspects that are similar in the sense the kind of skills that you end up using, but the whole process of utilizing those skills would be very much different. But I can guarantee you that if you have developed and honed your skills anywhere, irrespective whether it's research or anywhere that you have worked and you have kind of developed those skills on critical thinking, problem solving, let's say analytical thinking, those can be carried forward to any career that you decide and you want to go towards.
Also, sir, speaking about these papers, what was the most interesting or something that stood out in an article you recently wrote about? Can you tell us something
Ah,
interesting?
with regards, yeah, I think the very first article that it's only been very recent that I've started to write. I think I'm on my 13th or 14th article as of now. But I think the first article that I wrote was on this radioactive boars, wild boars in the region around Chernobyl, where the nuclear accident had happened back in, I think, 70s, I presume. So I think that was a very interesting one because if you look at the research work itself, right, the research works, it kind of gives you a very good idea of how research is done. It might seem, I mean, if you look at the process, it might seem like a rudimentary process. They're going step by step, trying to solve a problem, achieving a result, and then asking more questions. But that is the true nature of research, and that's what I really enjoyed about that research paper that I was trying to kind of, let's say, easyfy for a larger audience. But for me, I was never even trying to kind of present the results of the paper. For me, the focus when I was trying to write that article was about the process of research. And I think that kind of gives, and as soon as anyone who is doing any research anywhere, as soon as you identify that rudimentary process of research, that step-by-step process, you kind of, I think you have found the right place for yourself and where you can then start building on your research, right? So let's say if you have understood that this is the process, then you just take any problem and you just fit that problem into that process. And I can guarantee you again that you'll find those solutions. And this is where I will again bring that point that this is that whole structure of research is what you'll, if you read or learn a little bit more about critical thinking. So critical thinking also points, there is a kind of a saying, you five whys in critical thinking. So whenever you're trying to solve a problem, just think of five questions, and each of those questions should kind of dive deeper and deeper and finding you to the final main point of the problem. And that's what research is all about. It's trying to identify that final problem. So there are good parallels that you can pick up those skills of research, and then how do you adapt to your life as well. So that's something that I.
Personally, sir, I have to say that I've read your articles in LinkedIn posts and all, and I find it really witty and mysterious, and it kept me engaged. I have to say, there was one article about the mouse where there
Hmm.
was a day that turns the skin invisible. It
Yeah.
was really good, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, that was an interesting one because obviously I have a lot of newsletters subscribed to, so a lot of new things kind of keep popping up. So this was very interesting to me because the dye that they're using is something that you'll find, like I don't know, in India it's not yet common, but those I think those Cheeto dust, right? If you'll, it's like a red color thing, and if you kind of keep on using it, your hand would turn red and everything. But it's such a common thing available out there, and somehow certain set of researchers thought, well, let's just give it a try and see we can do with it, and they have ended up finding, and I would say, an excellent solution. And once it's kind of develops further, it's just very big, but once it develops further, I think it has real great applications to potentially bringing, I think, more efficiency in healthcare and potentially bringing healthcare at a little bit lower cost, right? Because these are things that are easily available. You don't have to go. for a high-end MRI and or let's say a high-end PET scan, something like that, when you can use these kind of let's say easily available solutions. So yeah, that was an interesting one. I like that one.
So also going a little bit off topic, sir, I've read about bacteria and algae which can degrade plastic as well,
Mhm.
and that is because of certain enzymes which they produce. So I was just wondering what could be the scope of using environmental engineering like as an application in this field. Like, can we create more such organisms at a larger scale just for the betterment of this planet or something?
I think most certainly it is certainly possible. Now, I think yesterday only I was watching. Yeah, I think I was watching a video regarding these bacteria that can actually consume nylon essentially, right? Because nylon is a very very sturdy material. But microorganisms are, I think, are the most adaptable out there. They have been around even well. I think if you have read my article about Luca, right, the last universal common ancestor, that was also a microorganism. It has been around for what 1 point some million years for us. So essentially microorganisms are capable of solving much of our problems. And what you mentioned, I think plastic degrading bacteria is something that has already been identified. And I think when it comes to bacterial work, there is a lot of you'll have to do a lot of engineering with the bacteria. You'll have to genetically engineer it, and then you have to grow it to a scale. And I think generally, what in microbial research, it's good at a smaller scale, but taking it to that larger scale, going it, let's say, from milliliters to liters to potentially kiloliters, that is where you start to see the adaptation problem. That is where I think the real research, or let's say the engineering research, comes in. So because I know back in my IIT Delhi days, there was one of professor in biochemical engineering department. He was basically scaling up a process where he was essentially using bacteria to produce biodegradable plastics, right? So he had at that time, that was like maybe almost 10 years now, he had received some crores of funding from the government, and he had set up a large scale reactor to actually do that. So it's not something not achievable, but yeah, it takes effort and time to kind of get to that stage that, okay, you can say it's actually going to solve some problem, right? You're going to maybe start taking up some 1,000 kilos of plastic from your local community and then start working on it. But taking it to the level of amount of waste that we're producing, I think it's still time that we reach there. And I think that's where multitudes of solutions from multitudes of different ways of approaching different solutions that answer the same problem, that should be the approach. That while, yeah, you're working on that, maybe we should work on reducing our plastic usage for the first thing altogether, and then kind of think about while we are solving the problem of existing plastic pollution.
Right, so that's very insightful. Also, another small follow-up question. There's a lot of interesting research right now happening. So, does it make you want to go back to the research field?
No, not necessarily. I think I am, as you mentioned, there's a lot of interesting research that is happening, and I really enjoy learning about it. And whenever I get a chance, as part of my actual work, when I'm actually traveling, I get to engage with the researchers and potentially kind of try to get more insights about what they're doing and how they might be solving problems. And that's something that I want to kind of build a little bit more into my science communication as well, so that the world kind of gets to know a little bit more about the solutions that are being developed. So I'm certainly now very much bent on this career, and I'm very much interested because I think I'm not disengaged from research. I am actually part of the research process. I'm not doing the research, but I'm helping the researchers get their work out there, either in my own professional capacity or even in my personal capacity as a science communicator. So yeah, I'm good with it right now.
I think it's a great work, sir. Also, do you
Thank
like
you.
have any advices you can give to the young researchers as well as people like us who are, going into the science communication and publishing field?
So I think I don't know, something that I have felt is maybe after school somehow that love for science was kind of gone for some time for whatever reasons. So I would really recommend everyone to kind of start appreciating the science that is around you. I think there is no way that you can say that you're not affected by science, because it's everything and anything everywhere. It's inside you. So I think for anyone who is interested in doing anything related with science, be it research, be it science communication, I think start appreciating and loving science. And as soon as you start, maybe when you start appreciating it, you start loving it. And I think I'll give an example of there's a very very popular photograph. I don't remember where it is from, but there is a whole host of researchers who have developed this quantum theory model. There's Marie Curie there, there's Einstein there. I think almost 10, 15 Nobel Prize winners are featured in that photograph. And back in my high school day, when I was in class 12, 11, 12, trying to fight through quantum mechanics and all. I think I used to hate on that photograph, right? Looking at that and saying that these people have ruined my life today, right? But as I have grown more appreciative of science, I think when I looked at that picture, maybe it has been quite some time I have looked at it even now. But when I looked at it while during my PhD, I think that appreciation for those people and the regard for those people was at an all-time high, right? Because I knew and understood that what they did and achieved and how they have impacted my life, how they have made my life so much more easier, right? So I think anyone there, if you're doing research, start appreciating the science around you, and I think you'll start appreciating your own research. And if you're into science communication, I think that's the most important thing, because you guys first need to appreciate it for yourself, and then you need to make sure that everyone appreciates it as well. So that's something I'll tell you, that just start appreciating science and scientists, and I'm sure that love will certainly come.
Yes, sir. I think your words would surely have a great impact on our listeners. Thank you so much for your time. That brings us to the end of our session, and all the best for your journey ahead.
Perfect. Thank you so much
Thank you,
for
sir.
having me.
Thank you so
It's a
much.
pleasure to interact with you.
Yes, the
Thank
same.
you.